All right, thanks for visiting the Nature Bats Last channel. I'm Guy McPherson. I'm here again with Peter Miller, and we are going to talk, as always, about the emotional, intellectual, and physical response to the sort of information that I tend to share with people. And I'll start by mentioning that we have visitors in this house, and they're youngsters relative to me in their late 20s, early 30s. And it got me to wondering, how should I relay the message of abrupt, irreversible climate change, which has been reported by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, one of the more scientifically conservative bodies in the history of the planet. In fact, before their reports get released, they have to be approved by the governments of the world. So it's a pretty conservative operation. So they admit that we're in the midst of abrupt, irreversible climate change. But my doing so has had quite adverse consequences for my personal life. Anyway, I got these late 20s, early 30s people in my house, and they know what I know about abrupt, irreversible climate change. But it made me think, should I talk about it with other people who are their age, or should I just, let them get on with their lives and they'll realize what happens when it happens, when we lose habitat for our species? So I'm in something of an intellectual mess today. So that's going to form at least some of the conversation that we're having today. So, Peter, can you comment on that maybe, or at least introduce your free course?
For sure. So I mean, in my experience and in what I do in my work in psychology and mental health, meeting with young people, I see people 18 and onwards, and I'm actually quite delighted to meet with like young people, because young people that show an interest in mental health, they could have some impact. I mean, everybody can, but I think they can have more, because they could be, having young children, they could be having children, they could learn some things and then pass those things on. And they're also starting earlier in life learning about these things, so that they can avoid a lot of the common problems and even life destructive events, that come from not knowing things about mental health. I mean, a lot of it is just living in ignorance. That's where a lot of pain and suffering comes from. So to be enlightening younger people, is that's where it's at. I mean, if they're genuinely interested, and not all young people are, but a few of them are, and those are my favorite. Um, so I guess it kind of depends, right? Like what kind of individuals they are, who you're sharing your information with, if how much they're going to be open to it and how they'll respond. Um, I mean, there's also that tendency for people to kind of sort of have that indestructible kind of know-it-all kind of attitude that exists too. It's like sometimes when you're interacting with a teenager, and even though you have 30 years life experience and you've been to university, they somehow know better than you do.
Well, when I
But
was a teenager, I knew everything,
it's
right?
it's amazing. Like, how do how do you get that level of confidence?
It was amazing
Um,
too, because I knew everything when I was a teenager and my parents didn't know anything. And then as I get older, they knew more and more, and I knew less and less. It was the weirdest thing.
it's yeah, and I'm looking forward to watching that humility kick in. At some point where you start learning more, and your mind is sort of it's expanded, and even your mind is even blown, and you're like, whoa! Like it's like the more I learn and understand, the more I realize how hard it is to understand things, and how many things I assumed I knew that I didn't. Um, so I mean, I guess you got to kind of be careful, and I guess there's some preparation and understanding who you're talking to before you can go, you know, safely deeper into the subject. And I guess that it's worth, your time and effort, kind of thing. Uh, but still some potential value there to do that. But I guess your question was like, is it was your question, is it like more worth my while, or is it like going to be something that could affect the way people view you as a person? Is that what you were
Well,
wondering?
Well, as a scientist and a teacher, I feel an obligation to provide people with the evidence that I come across,
Mhm.
right? So I feel that's my responsibility for reasons unclear to me. It's not as if I get paid for it or anything. I just think that's the right thing to do. But then how do you do the right thing with people at different ages? People my age and older, I'm in my early 60s, people my age and older, when I provide them the evidence indicating that we're going to run out of habitat for our species, and then, of course, without habitat, we're going to die. People my age are just like, yeah, well, I've had a good run, and my back hurts most of the time anyway, so whatever. Right? I mean,
Okay,
it
yeah,
runs from being that casual to, oh no, I have kids or I have grandkids, and this is terrible, and how can we fix this, and so on.
right, yeah,
Whereas with younger people, obviously they have their entire lives in front of them. They don't want to even hear this information. And so should I provide this information?
hmm hmm
And if so, should I provide additional information to go along with it? Right?
right,
Like like I'd say there's not a moonshot. There's the odds of us getting through this beyond another few years are more like a Jupiter shot, right? It's extremely long odds based on the evidence I've seen that humans are going to be on this planet beyond another very few years.
yeah.
But it could
Uh,
happen,
it could.
right?
Uh, and I mean, and some people are deeply fascinated by these types of subjects. And like I was one of those people who came into your world in 2018, 19, and I'm just just deeply struck by that book Going Dark, as I've mentioned before. And like so deeply struck, like I got to email this guy and say something, right? And then you invited me to have a meeting, and we sort of went from there. And that was unexpected too, because I'm like, he's just important, this is the guy who's way up here in academics, and so it was a nice surprise. But so anyway, like to bring this back to mental health psychology, like and my course. So my course is at freebpdcourse.com. Um, I think it is equally enlightening to learn about, how mental health happens, sort of like in the context of industrialization, the capitalism. I draw a lot of links between what happens in childhood brain development and how it can lead to things like borderline personality disorder, contribute to, at least, right? Because in order to have a healthy brain while you're growing up, and especially if you're extra sensitive human, you need to have good attachments with your caregivers. You need to know what
Mm-hmm.
warmth and a warm connection is, and to have people that are patient with teaching you things, and even have a little bit of ability to teach you things about emotions, and how our thoughts can go into all these unnecessary places. And from my experience in my own life and working with like thousands of others, like I work with in the last 12 years, I'm certain it's surpassed 2 or 3 thousand. Like, and I collect history from everybody that I meet with, right? So I get an idea of their life. And it's like a repeating pattern. People they come into the world, their parents are usually preoccupied with many of their own issues. They're busy with work, or they have their own mental health issues, or there's other stresses that are interfering with a healthy childhood development. And so they don't learn anything about mental health. They don't have the right attachments and connections that they need at the right ages. And then in the long run, it leads to these toxic patterns that we call borderline personality disorder and other disorders, right? Like they're all sort of have patterns. But like if you come into the course and get sort of a bit of an insider perspective that I'm trying to offer, it's like, look, like, of course people are going to be messed up. And like in one of my punk songs, I call it a shit show. Like, of course life is going to be like a shit show, because you're not getting properly prepared in
Right.
your in what you know, and in your physiology, like your neurochemistry, like you're not being set up. But at the same time that you're not being set up, society is kind of like, everything's okay, you're on track, it's all going to work out. And so you go into your adult life thinking that you have all the tools, but you don't, right? And then what ends up happening is people just end up blaming each other for the things you went for things that go wrong, but they're actually all contributing to the problem because they don't have the right skills, tools, understanding. So, but anyway, like if you come in and you learn some things, it can give you a way to reduce your judgments, your self judgments, like stop being so hard on yourself, like because you didn't learn what you needed to learn. And it kind of sucks that learning later in life, but it's not like you can't change the patterns. You can. It's just a bit of an effort, you know. But like that thing with self-judging, I mean, that's one of the most common things I see. Like people that are their own worst enemy. They're always beating themselves up, you know, like I should have known, I should have known. But how could you?
Right.
Because you don't live in a world or a context that sets you up that way. You just don't.
Right.
Um, and it's a
Right.
bit of it's a shocker, right? And in that, like Guy's material is kind of a shocker too. He's like, hello, like, did you realize this? Like, and we're like, most of us are like, no.
Well, and had I known a few years before I discovered the notion of abrupt irreversible climate change, had I known about that before then, I would have stayed on campus. And then I would have had the campus legal team to help me get through the defamation campaign that followed. Right. So the what happened to me for presenting this information was almost universally bad. And yet I felt an obligation to present it to people. It's interesting. Late last week, Robert Sapolsky at Stanford just had his latest book come out. It's called Determined, and it's about our absence of free will, even though everybody thinks they have free will. The evidence indicates otherwise. And he says, I read an interview of him just a day or two ago, and he said, he doesn't want to provide this information. It's terrible. Nobody wants to know, and yet the evidence is all there. And he feels awful for telling people what the evidence indicates because nobody wants to know.
Almost
And
nobody, almost nobody.
right, right, almost nobody. And I feel a lot the same way about this information. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about with you today was people of different ages obviously have to be presented this information in different ways. Like you tell a 5-year-old, and I've actually had this experience when I was on a speaking tour. You got this 5-year-old, and she overhears the conversation that I'm having with her mom, and she goes, "Oh, that's terrible. So we're all going to die. It's a terrible thing." And like 3 minutes later, she's out playing with the dog. You know, it's no longer on her mind. She
Mhm.
just goes back to play mode. And but I strongly suspect you tell somebody when they're 18 or 25, it's a completely different reaction because now they have the ability to process the information. They're not just about from living from minute to minute, which you could
Mhm.
argue is a great way for all of us to live. I learned a lot from that 5-year-old, but most of us don't live that way, and so it's difficult. It's difficult for me knowing how to tell people what I know, and so mostly I just don't do it anymore. It's just not worth the time.
I think like I mean, I've talked to you about this before too, about like ethics and the maybe some of the ethics around NTHE, you know, like and how, and that's that question, how should people be introduced to it if they're coming in, right? And um like I was just brainstorming there as you were talking. I'm like, maybe it would maybe it would be the most ethical if they were a certain, you know, where their brain is developed to the point where they can process things in a more advanced way. Like, and then I think also, like, I don't think people should be deeply into this information if they don't have any skills that they're developing for mental health, like, because you could just quickly sink because the other things that, the other toxic things that you picked up in your life, the toxic patterns, and then you can't handle this information, because you sort of need to be able to have a way to remain stable at least most of the time, right?
Right.
Like we all break here and there, and I break here and there, but for the most part, I can remain stable because I've learned
Mhm.
some things, right? And
Right.
I have some practices that I do. Um, so I mostly remain stable with a blip here and there. but um, and when I came across your message, I was still kind of advancing myself in being able to remain stable most of the time. Um, so that's another argument for the course, and I think I've said this before too. Like, if you're going to go into Guy's world, like, don't go into it with no skills, like kind of thing, like, because
Right.
it can be emotionally evocative and overwhelming at times. And I
And
don't think that's Guy's fault. It just is what it is. Like,
and that's not just abrupt irreversible climate change. It's a lot of things that you encounter in your life. A lot of things you encounter are emotionally difficult to handle,
mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
less
The
less when
adult
you get
relationships in general, right?
absolutely. And I can remember a lot of my students on campus. So these are almost always students who are in their early 20s, and it's a difficult time, right? Their parents are splitting up or thinking about getting divorced, and their grandparents are dying always right before an exam. It's interesting how that happens. And so there's all kinds of emotionally challenging things going on in their lives. And early on, I figured out that my course is not the most important thing in these people's lives, right? How could it be? Yet
Mm-hmm.
every other professor I ever encountered thought that every student in their course, this was the most important thing in their lives. My class, and I'm like, how can you even think that, right? That your course in wildlife management is more important than the really important things going on in their lives?
Right.
Come on.
No, yeah. Educators and helpers, like, they do play a very small role, and I've been brought to that point of humility too, where I don't expect to help everybody, and I don't expect to have a huge impact with everybody. It's just like very small, like, and if even if they take away just a little, then I guess that's sufficient.
Absolutely. And I would argue that's a big deal. And so doing what I'm doing now, in which I'm reaching a relatively few people compared to when I was on campus, I think back every now and then and I realize that even though I was teaching a large number of people on campus, probably I was only seriously reaching a very few of them. So maybe one or two people each semester, which means maybe 2 to 4 people each year, I've had a significant impact on their lives. And
Yeah.
so now I just have to remind myself that that's enough. If
Mhm.
I positively impact one person's life, that's great because a lot of
Mhm.
people don't do that. A lot of people go through their lives and they don't positively influence anybody ever. They might negatively influence a lot of people, but that's
Mhm.
not the same thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Well,
so,
I don't know how many people are going for impact. I think they're just going for progress and upward mobility. Most, in my opinion, maybe that's
right.
a bit jaded, but
Well, I've been committed to a life of service for my entire life, basically. And I don't know how I got to be that way. Probably my parents being teachers had a lot to do with it. And so once I realized I was not going to make it in the NFL or the NBA, the National Football League or the National Basketball Association, once I realized I wasn't going to be a professional athlete, it occurred to me that I had to do something, and that something had to be to provide service to people. And so
Mhm.
that's how I ended up in this horrifying situation. And 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 I've finally come to realize that if I positively influence a very few people, that's better than nothing. That's better than none, which is how most people spend their lives. I mean, do you think your local used car salesman really is concerned about how good your life is going?
No,
Of
no, and of
course
course,
not.
like, and you know, for some people, pick up on that lack of genuineness and authenticity in human life, and just really find it repulsive, right? And then so if we encounter someone like yourself who's trying to be authentic, trying to be radically honest about what's happening in the world, it's a breath of fresh air, right? And but at the same time, I'll just reiterate, like it is a breath of fresh air, but it comes with a bit of risk. So don't go into Guy's world without any emotional skills, I guess is what I would say, right? Turn to any resource. I think mine is pretty decent and I've worked hard at it, but there's lots of others. Get some self-care going where you're understanding and working with your emotions better.
Right.
So that, you hear one thing Guy says in one of his videos and suddenly feel life isn't worth living at all. Like that's not the point, right?
Right. Well, and interesting you bring that up. Um, my reminders for today, because my phone and my laptop remind me of everything, whether it's important or not in my life. Today, the reminder was that it was the 55th birthday of somebody who was a really, really decent human being and a good friend. And he committed suicide 2.5 years ago. And he just he was among the most knowledgeable people I've ever met in my life. He knew a lot about a lot of things. He was very intelligent, but I don't know why. I don't know. I'm not in his brain. I never was in his brain. I don't know why he did what he did when he was young. He was 52 plus years old. That's a pretty young person from my perspective. And, and as nearly as I could tell, his life was going really well, but obviously it wasn't. And so I'm not this person. I don't know how to put myself in that position, but it's the kind of thing that sets me back from doing what I'm doing. Because of course I was accused, as I've been accused of I've been accused by many people of contributing to the suicide of several people because I provide this information. And I'm not sure that it's my fault when somebody commits suicide as a result of my presenting evidence discovered by other people.
Right. And again, I would add, and I've said this in another video, like, were you part of their childhood development? Were you one of their parents? Were you the toxic elements of their family life? These are things that come way before encountering messages in the world like Guys. I mean, if people are already kind of in a toxic, disordered place, I mean, listening to Guys speak about things is, I would say, pretty minimal contribution. I mean, it is evocative and a little bit emotionally stressful. But if you're already prone to go down those depressive rabbit holes, I would say, you know, it's probably it would happen one way or another, kind of thing. Which again, I would again emphasize, please learn something about mental health in your life in general, and if you want to go into challenging subjects like this,
Right.
Don't do it irresponsibly,
Right. Right. There's most people watching or listening to this probably heard of Louis C.K., the comedian who's done lots of stand-up work, and he's also been in television shows. Anyway, he recalls having a conversation when he was very young with another youngster, and he brought up the idea that everybody dies, and this other kid says, no, they don't. Not everybody dies. My mom says not everybody dies. And so it turns into this, long, like 5-minute long comedy routine about who lives, right? Who gets to live forever,
right?
or as I would say it, who has to live forever. But that's been my goal, is to remind people that our lives are short. Even if I'm wrong about everything, by the way, your life is still short, because each of us only gets, what, 70, 80, 90 years at most. The rare person gets to live 100 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
But for the rest of us, that's not long. When I was on a speaking tour in Western Europe, so this goes back to 2015, I think, there's a woman who was having a birthday party at her 117th birthday. She was at the time the oldest person in the world. And somebody asked her to ponder those first 117 years of her life at her birthday party. And she said, it seemed rather short. Are you kidding me? 117 years? I've lived 63 years, and it's felt rather long
Yeah.
for a lot of those years.
Yeah, and if I mean the nature and quality of your life probably affects the way it feels in terms of how fast it goes, right? And if you really are appreciating and enjoying life, maybe it seems like it goes a bit faster. But I guess it's all just subjective and perspective, right? On how people look at that. But I
As,
mean, to appreciate
as
it is important.
as Seneca wrote a long time ago, a couple thousand years ago, Seneca of ancient Greece wrote something like, it's not that life is short, it's that we waste most of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you could argue that a couple thousand years ago, people didn't live as long as they do today, but still, people were living into their 50s and 60s.
Right.
Not a huge difference from the way we live today, the length of time we have today. And yes, it's not that life is short, it's that people waste most of it. They just don't take advantage of living moment to moment and appreciating what we have here.
And here's a challenging question for that. Are we set up to actually live a completely fulfilling, enjoying life, or in the system that we're in, are we more likely set up to become clones and drones and slaves, right? And just sort of let go of our creativity, for example. Lots of people have creative abilities and they just get lost because they kind of just give in to the system and the demands of the system just to survive, right? So all that's left is that they work excessive amounts for low pay, and then they're drained. So then what's left, right? Like it's hard not to be, I guess, angry and cynical sometimes because people are often in those circumstances. And even people like we were talking earlier before our video today, even people who go into college and university and they come out with like some training in humanities, it's hard to get going. And you're not really paid what you're worth most often, like paid for what you're doing, like the efforts you're putting in. So like, are we even set up to, do most people have that level of privilege, where they can fully realize themselves and have the time and space to get the understanding and the skills to appreciate life. Like, I don't think it's one of those things where you can just say appreciate life. It's better that way, right? Like,
right, of course not.
like a person needs to be like have the time and space for self-care and to be self-reflective and mindful, and even like be going to the gym or doing breathing exercises. Like that takes, if you're really going to take care of yourself properly, you need at least a couple hours a day, don't you? But how many people
Yes,
have that?
yes.
How
Well,
many people
exactly.
have that, right?
No, we do have that, but we're unwilling to spend our time on it.
Do we have that, you think?
Most people could carve out 2 hours of their lives if they worked at it. Now, I admit that it would be work because yes, we're driven to work most of the time. Kurt Vonnegut used to write and say something like this. He'd say, join the army, you'll see the world. It's a great life. And then he'd say, I'm just kidding. And then he'd say one more thing like that. I'm just kidding. And then he'd say, create something. Go into the arts, write books, make paintings. At least then you will have created something. It will become something that comes from you, from within you.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was just beautiful. And of course, you could argue that he made his living at a time when people actually read books. And he was a renowned writer, obviously, and then public speaker. So he could make a living that way. It's far more difficult to make a living that way today. But there's few people who do it. And I would also argue that he was right. To create something is important. It's meaningful for any one of us to create something out of nothing, out of an idea, out of an inspiration we have from the natural world or whatever. That's incredible. That just doesn't happen in most people's lives ever. I was watching Finch, the 2021 film, yesterday, and they're driving and the planet has been destroyed. Basically, it's just one big sandstorm, and they're driving across the United States going west, and a butterfly hits the windshield, and they all stop out, and they all stop, and they jump out, and they're having a great time. Everybody from the dog to the person playing Finch, Tom Hanks, and to the robot that's with them. They're all, because it's amazing. Here is life.
Mm-hmm.
They thought the whole planet was devoid of life or nearly devoid of life. And here's a butterfly that they just smashed with their windshield. And how often do we do that? Right?
Yeah.
How often do we stop to smell the flowers? Literally. We talk about it all the time.
Well, I mean, I guess I'll just say this, like a bit of a counter again. Like, I totally hear what you're saying, and I think that is a better mindset and space to be in, more enjoyable. Hard to attain if you are, say, worried about where am I gonna get my next meal. Hard to attain if you have toxic, abusive elements in your life that you're trying to navigate around. Hard to attain. Uh, I don't know. Again, if you were not raised to be in a healthy space in your mind, like if you have toxic, unhealthy people around you for years and years and years, and that's what you're conditioned into, that's what's role modeled, that's what you see. Basically, what you do is you repeat it, right? And it makes it really hard to enjoy life because you're acting out all these dysfunctional patterns that you think are normal, right?
Right.
So until you can actually develop enough self-awareness to see that that's what happened to you and start making some adjustments and start doing some practices to relieve yourself of the unnecessary madness, I guess I'll say, until you get to that point of awareness and ability, it's really hard to, I think, follow through with what you're saying. Not that it's not a better place to be. Again, I agree. It's hard to get there and just do it. It's like again, people say just don't be depressed, just don't. But that's really oversimplifying things.
Of course. And so I'll turn again to another Tom Hanks movie.
Okay.
A League
You
of
like Tom
Our
Hanks.
Own.
You like Tom Hanks.
A League of Our Own. And he plays the coach, right? And he's talking with the women who have created a league of their own. And he's telling them that it's not supposed to be easy. It's not worthwhile if it's easy. It's only by making it difficult, by being hard to do, that makes it worthwhile. Otherwise, anybody can do it. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but yes, life is hard. There's no doubt in my mind that life poses many challenges for everybody, not just you and me, not just people who have the information that we both talk about, probably entirely too frequently. But it's difficult for everybody. You know, almost nobody's born a billionaire with all the privileges that come with that.
Yeah, I think life is by nature hard. That's actually the first sentence from Scott Peck, his book, The Road Less Traveled. Life is hard. That's the first sentence. But I think the system that we're in, this industrialized system, it makes it way harder than it needs to be. And because again, we are left in ignorance of how to be healthy from the get-go, right? So not only is life hard, then we make it extra hard, which is why, relationships often don't work, and we fall into these manic depressive states. I mean, neurochemistry is a thing too. That's part of it, but
right.
That's probably just sort of the normal how life is hard. But then we add to it with all of our extra dysfunction. So I don't know. One of my favorite things, I think, in being a psychologist is to give people a bit of an understanding and some reasons to not be so hard on themselves. Because when people really get into that severe self-judgment, I think that's what really they crater really fast. Because it's that when you get into self-judgment, you're feeling nothing but shame, and shame is really, really heavy. So you want to be able to relieve yourself of shame as much as you can,
And I think that's why it's important to point out that life is hard.
Yeah.
Life is filled with challenges. Life is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Or as pointed out in the movie They Live, which is not really recommendable based on the quality of the acting, but rather on the quality of the ideas that appear. They live. The star, Roddy Piper, says Earth, civilization, society, something is in heat again. No, no, no. Here's how it goes. Life's a bitch, and she's in heat again. Right? Life
Yeah,
is
yeah,
hard
yeah, yes.
all the time for everybody. So if you can find a moment when life is not challenging, when life is easy for you and things are going your way, and you have a full stomach and a decent night's sleep, and you get to play with a dog or with a child or whatever, revel, revel in that.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
some people,
gratitude is a great practice. Gratitude journals, that's an uplifting thing. But you gotta again try it out, right? Like,
right? And also people living in on this continent, North America, our shared continent, are almost uniformly more privileged than people living on, say, the African continent or much of Asia. There are certain privileges we enjoy that other people have never had access to. I haven't missed very many meals in my life, and it shows. And I've had the ability to get a decent education at a cost I could afford. And I know that's going away and already has gone away within the last decade or so for a lot of individuals. But we have access to free libraries. We have access to all these privileges that we could at least be grateful for.
yes, and again, yeah, gratitude I think is actually, I think I explained in one of our last videos about sort of some practices about how to do that, and how when I was young as a skateboarder, how we sort of automatically did it, and maybe that was why it was partly why it was so enjoyable. In addition to being hanging out as buddies and just being out in the fresh air, we were also like, I'm so thankful for this piece of cement, that
Right.
I can grind my board on it and do a little trick. Like, thank you, cement. you know, like we were, that's it was an attitude. We never talked about it that way, but that's what we were doing.
Right.
Um,
And
you can do that with, hey,
you never talked about it that way because nobody talked about it that way.
no, we just did it, and it just
And
sort of that's why it was cool to be a skateboarder, because it
right.
was enjoyable somehow, right?
And still very few people talk about it. I think it's the most it's an indication of the kind of privilege we have that we can feel grateful, that we can express gratitude on probably a daily basis for most people watching or listening to this.
Mm-hmm.
Probably
Mm-hmm.
on a daily basis, there's something we can find in our lives to be grateful for. Wow, that's huge.
Yeah. Uh, and again, I'll bring it back to context again. Like, say you're not around people who talk about gratitude very much, because like when I was around my buddies when we were young, we were always talking about how to do this, how to do that, why that was a cool skate spot, why it was, it was trivial to everybody else, but so cool to us. Like, but we would talk about it as a group, and so I mean, it really depends who you are around, and and honestly, people don't talk that much to each other lately. I think technology has really destroyed that, because we're so busy doing this, right? Like,
Right,
that we
right.
talk to each other probably 80% less. I don't know, maybe more. Like, it's
We
really
chat with we
not
chat with
good.
each other a lot more though.
Hey,
We chat with each other a lot more.
on the phone?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think it's the same.
No, lot of chatting, not much meaningful conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, so I mean, you got to. I guess it's just a matter of factoring everything in to and if by us having these conversations and talking about the things we've learned, hopefully it can have people can be like, yeah, I'm going to use that one thing they talked about today, and I'm going to bring that into my life. And even though we live in this, I would call it a toxic industrial system that cares nothing for your health and well-being, uh, or it tries to look like it cares. But
Yes.
I don't think it
It
actually really does, but
no. It cares until you pay the check.
cares enough to keep you just alive enough, right?
Yes.
Just so you can keep turning that knob at your job or whatever, turning that wrench or whatever you do, like just enough, just sane enough, just physically healthy enough so that you can keep the machine going. Um, I know that sounds incredibly cynical, but and not all work environments are the same. And some people do care more and they talk more about caring, but I guess I speak in terms of systems and generalities quite often, and the bigger picture. That's
You know what George Carlin said about cynicism.
mm,
Scratch any cynic and you'll uncover a disappointed idealist.
hmm hmm yeah.
And and I think that's right. I think that there's a lot of cynicism out there, and I think it's fully justified because we all wanted to save the world, right? I mean, that's how I grew up. That's what I heard all the time. We need to do this and we need to do that. And guess what? As a society, we didn't do this and we didn't do that. So I'm a
No,
disappointed
no.
idealist. I had these ideals. I just wanted to save the world. Is that asking too much? Apparently so.
Well, I guess the thing is like if you have that passion and you have that sort of that wishing that is inside of you, yeah, you have to be able to come to terms with that. And I have been, I think when I get destabilized in my life, I am not accepting reality. Like I'm not willing to feel the sadness that is part of what's happening. Like,
Hmm.
and I start having these should thoughts and these demands, like it shouldn't be like this, and people should care and they should be educated, right? And and the system shouldn't be set up this way where it's so much harder than it needs to be, and people have to focus so much energy on making rich people richer. Like, why did we set it up that way? Like, I start getting that the anger, right? And
You're just trying to save the world too. Just one person at a time and
yeah,
saving the emotional world, the societal world.
but it is when you actually when you dig deep enough, you realize how futile it is. Like that you can't do very much, and that the system as it is, it's just going to double down on what it does. Like it's just going to go harder and harder. Like as soon as the Arctic opens up, they're just going to all attack it with all the fisheries and all the oil rigs. Like they're just going to exploit the shit out of it, are they not? Like
Right. Yes, absolutely. And that's why I think it's really important what you do and what I do, because one person at a time, we can only influence one person at a time.
Mhm.
And if we positively influence even a relatively few number of people, we have to view that as a great win.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we positively influence the lives of a half a dozen or a dozen people. Isn't that enough?
Oh,
Holy
yeah.
cow,
Well,
that's huge.
it is pretty grandiose of us to want to save the world. I think.
Right. Yes.
um, and yeah, the bottom line is that the system is way too big, way more powerful than any of us people who are speaking against it. And it's I think you need to be willing to feel a certain level of sadness about it, and the more you learn about what Guy talks about, the more you hear about all the self-reinforcing feedback loops and all of the way that it's just sort of crumbling in, like there's a deep sadness that you like. Are you willing to feel that feeling so that it doesn't take you over? And I have to remind myself, like it's okay to feel that way. It's totally makes sense. Like if anyone was hearing that their world was being destroyed by greedy psychopaths, that would be really frustrating. Like that would be, it's like it's so valid to feel that way.
Right. But I would argue that that's been the case for several thousand years. It's
Yeah,
just
it just got worse when we got these tools, these
right,
industrial
exactly.
tools.
Technology has advanced enough that just a relatively few people can really make a dent in the big piece of pie, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it
yeah.
used to be that really important people could only influence a relatively small part of the world.
Hmm.
And now we have a handful of sociopaths who can destroy life for all of us.
yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. That's not even the word. Like it's not big enough. Like you feel. I'm just gonna go through a list of feeling words. You feel powerless feeling. You feel frustration. You feel sadness. You could feel defeated. Mm, you could feel demoralized. You could feel you could feel victimized. That makes sense, I think, to feel that
Yeah,
way.
absolutely.
Because
Why would you not?
you could feel
Because
robbed. You could feel robbed because they have robbed you
yes.
of, of a different quality of life. They're
Mhm.
basically using everybody as much as possible for their own ends. Um, so you could feel bound like a slave, right? Like that makes sense. Like
Yeah. I mean,
it's not like we have zero. Like it's a spectrum. Like we have all of us have a little bit of more or less freedom and privilege, but on the whole, like I think they've robbed us of pretty much everything. Like it just in terms of quality of life. Like I could have been drinking cleaner water. I could have been breathing cleaner air. There could have been much more majesty in the nature that they're taking because of all the different things that they take, right? Like how much of our how what would Earth look like if the sociopaths didn't take over 150 years ago, right? Like with all the tools they have now, like what would it look like? What
right.
would it feel like? What would it taste like? Like I've heard that if you look at the sky, it doesn't even look the same anymore. Like it's not the same. It's not the same color of blue. Does that make sense?
Right. Right. And same for the ocean. The ocean used to be blue. Now it's turned green.
So
Huge patches of the ocean are obviously covered with plastic, and even bigger portions have turned green that used to be blue. Are you kidding me? People tell me all the time we don't have that kind of power. We poor little human animals don't have the ability to completely screw the planet. Really?
on a huge scale, we do.
Absolutely. You take 8 billion of us and we can do anything.
Like it's yeah. If you put it at the right scale, like I was out trying to help my daughter this weekend. Like I was explaining, and at one point I had to go to the pharmacy because we were staying overnight and I wasn't expecting it, and I had to go get my medication, right? And because I didn't bring my medication with me. Anyway, I'm in the pharmacy and I'm just looking around at all the aisles, and I'm just like, this is just one of millions of these pharmacies. Like with like this pharmacy alone probably has a million products on all these aisles, right? All this plastic, all this stuff, and this is just one little tiny nodule, right? Of the system
Right.
at scale, and that's just pharmacies. Like there's so many plastics and materials and things that have been exploited to make all this stuff. Like I don't know if people think about that.
That reminds me of something I heard when I was in college. So this goes back a year or two. Pharmaceuticals just are for people who can't handle reality.
Well, it can help numb it, and that's I guess that's one of the ways that they keep us functioning in the
Exactly.
dysfunction and keep us turning
Exactly.
those wrenches.
And
So
and when I was in college, that was quite a few years ago. And there was no such thing as these big box pharmacy stores, right? Now there's like I don't even want to name them, but I think there's three that pretty much own all of North America. They have the
mm,
whole market. In fact, until 2 weeks ago, in this little village of Bellows Falls, Vermont, there were two pharmacy stores, and now there's one, and it's one of those big three. The other one was a family-owned operation. It had been here for 50 years or so, and
mhm.
too much competition for the big box.
I'm just trying to look up this thing quickly here. That's why I'm staring at my phone for a second. I'm thinking of this author, and you've probably heard about him. Is it Jacques Fresco, the Venus Project guy? You know what I'm talking
Yes,
about?
yes, yes.
You,
Jacques
yes,
Fresco.
Jacques Fresco. So he was like an engineer, right? Of sorts, or a societal engineer, right? So he wanted to flip the whole paradigm, right? Like whereas now we worship money, he was more like worship innovation, like worship nature, like make whoever can make it, whoever can come up with the stuff where it becomes they add to the sustainability, right? Like and where, machines do the majority of the drudgery. And so we can invest our energy otherwise to, like, for our self-care, our health, our creativity, adding to the quality of life for everybody, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a totally different paradigm, that we never got to realize.
Right.
And we won't, because this one has gone too far.
Right.
I don't know why. I just wanted to add that in there. I guess I just wanted to make sure that it could have been possible to do this differently, if we had the right thinkers at the right time. But
Yes.
in the trajectory of this extinction event, we didn't have those people at the right time.
Yes. Or at least they were not given enough power, or there were not enough of them, so they couldn't overcome the inertia of this system and the way it's been running off the tracks for so long.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, it's one or two people standing out there on the railroad track saying stop, and the train's coming at 90 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Not enough
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah. So, like, where does that leave people? I mean, like, after what we've talked about today, uh, learning to learning to develop a level of acceptance so that you're not like me, where I sometimes get into fighting reality. Um, and I think to get to acceptance, you need to be willing to feel all those types of emotions I was talking about. And if you need to look into, like, resources to learn how to feel, which our society does not teach us how to do, uh, it's probably wise that you do that, so that you can get to that level of acceptance and not be trying to either fix the whole world or saying there's no point in even living another day because because of the way things are happening. Even though it sucks and it's shit, like, we can still find little pockets of um, delight, can we not?
Yes, we can still create. As Kurt Vonnegut said years ago, we can still create. We can still do something meaningful. And even if we're only doing something meaningful for ourselves, for our individual selves, or for a small number of people in our lives, that's something. That's something meaningful. Whether it's sniffing the flower in your own backyard, chasing away the ridiculous squirrels that are trying to eat all the food that I intended for our chickens,
Yeah,
or opening a door for somebody.
yeah.
When I was on campus, so this goes back a few years, I went to open the door for a woman, and she stepped in, and as she walked by, she started crying. And so I asked her, "What what's up? Can I help with anything?" And she said her son had died recently, and her young son had died recently. And when people were so mean, so nasty to her in the wake of her son's death, that anytime somebody did something nice for her, it made her burst out into tears of joy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Open doors for people. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, offer a smile is a nice one. Um,
Yes.
One of my favorite new comedians is called Ismo. He's really funny. He talks about language. You can look him up on YouTube. Ismo.
Is it ISMO?
Yeah, he's a really funny guy. He talks about, for example, the word ass and all the different ways to use the word ass, and he's a funny guy. So, I mean, that's something you can do to lighten your spirits a little bit, while we're all while we're all in the shit show.
Right. And while we have
So,
this technology that is killing the entire planet, take advantage of that, YouTube. Oh,
yeah, well, it's there. And
right.
yeah, we can appreciate some of the arts a lot more than average. And I said that in the past. I'm sorry, that's what I meant to say. Um, yeah, it's all sort of there. And I think what you're saying in general is we're saying these are some ways to function in dysfunction. So you're in this dysfunctional thing. It is going to collapse and wreck itself. It's just a matter of time. It sucks. It's sad, and all those other feelings, and they're totally understandable and valid. But even though that's the case, we can still enjoy time together while it's here. And I really enjoy these talks with Guy. It's one of my favorite weekly things. And so, I look forward to it. And so it's just like creating those things in your life.
Right.
And it's
Right.
doable. You just gotta find a way.
Right. And to feel grateful to feel grateful about your friends and your family, if you have any, and those people who actually love you and that you love back. That's
Mhm.
worthwhile. That's
Mhm.
worth expressing your gratitude, if only to yourself. So,
It's amazing that
okay.
we can actually enjoy life given these circumstances, like it's
Right.
actually it is actually possible. And I'm not saying like everyone it's the same for everyone, but it is possible, I guess, for your average person living the average life in Western society. It is possible if you learn a few things and if you adjust some of your thinking and do a few different practices, like it is possible to find some pockets of delight. It's just not easy.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna paraphrase from the Iliad by Homer. He wrote something like, "We're the lucky ones. We get to die."
Hmm.
And what that means is we got to live. And unlike the gods, he was, comparing us mortals to the gods, we get to die. And what that means is we get to appreciate the moments because we know our lives are fleeting. The gods, why would they stop to smell a rose? They
Hmm.
have
Hmm.
millions, billions. They have infinity to smell roses. Why would they stop today? There's no
Yeah,
point.
right.
So we have we have some
Hmm.
amazing things in our lives, and expressing gratitude for them is something that certainly benefits me, and I think can benefit other people as well. With that, why don't you give us a pitch again for the few people who've made it to the end of this video? Talk about talk
Yes,
about your
you made
free.
it to the end. You guys are the best. Not many people make it to the end of the video. So yeah, my course is available for free. I think we're at about 52 participants now registered. And I am hearing some feedback here and there that it's helpful. Um, I think it is a good resource because it is actually the product of much of my own suffering. And I'm hoping that it can be a meaningful thing in the world for that reason, because when people suffer, I think they want to make their suffering meaningful, just like Viktor Frankl from his books Man's Search for Meaning. He was in the concentration camps, and his way of getting through the camps was to think, I'm going to like talk about this experience after it's over. So he wasn't one of the ones who ran for the fence because he was starving. And when you ran for the fence, they shot you immediately, right? They knew it was suicide if they ran for the fence. So anyway, I want to be like Viktor Frankl, and I'm hoping that the course functions in a similar way, to help people and to be a meaningful thing in the world. And it's all free. If you do want to donate to me, that's an option too. It was a ton of work to put it together, but you can find it at freebpdcourse.com. It's going to be there indefinitely. So enjoy.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
And we're going to wrap with that. Thanks again for a conversation, and I look forward to doing it again next
sounds good.
week.